Hi, thanks so much for having us here. This is really exciting. Really happy to be here. And thanks to you guys for being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Yeah. So I'm Kate and this is Ben. We are Float, and as it says in your email, a collaborative entity focused on the intersection of art and interactivity. We're doing a lot of different stuff right now. We're working on art and we're working on business. So we're kind of the art and commerce divide, trying to find ways to bring those two things together. Right now we're working on a piece called the Float Museum. We're working on some AR art, some commissions from Standard Vision, and something that we'll talk about a little bit later called VR Screensavers. It's exactly what you think it is. And then it's on the business side, we're doing some work with Google AR Core and some music video work as well. And also some interesting things that kind of do both. The call that we were on right before this class was talking to WEVR, a company out of LA who does a lot of really innovative VR work, and is also working with Paul Allen, may you rest in peace, working with his Holodome, which is a sort of projection map dome virtual reality platform, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And yes, this is Justin Timberlake as well. So if you were wondering, is that Justin? It's Justin. And then it's also one of the current things that we're doing too, I mentioned the Google AR Core piece. We'll know by Friday if this contract is for sure ours, but we just won a competition and we are in the running, so keep your fingers crossed for us on that. A little bit about how we got here. Move out of the way so you can see. As mentioned, I did my MFA at UCLA in the Media Arts Department. Also studied digital humanities while I was there and worked in the libraries and special collections. I did my MA in digital art and video, but my bachelor's was in graphic design and fine art. So I kind of come a little bit more from the fine art world and sort of moved more into the tech side of things in sort of recent years. This is sort of just the quick sort of list of things I'm doing now. Video artist, VR artist, the director of the Fembit Video Art Festival. We've got our second iteration coming up this spring. Currently a visiting art professor and communications professor at Pepperdine. My first year as a full-time professor, so it's a lot different than being adjunct, that's for sure. And I also work with grad students at Art Center College of Design. My background, when I was in grad school, I spent a lot of time using video and moving image to figure out ways to convey grief, loss, and mourning. This is a snippet from my MFA thesis, my written thesis. I also spent a lot of time working in live cinema. If anybody's familiar with that, it's kind of sort of VJing, live cinema, all sort of like live in the same sort of expanded history or expanded cinema universe. I'm also really interested in media history. Everything from like history of photography all the way up to where we are now. The history of VR, film, all those things. So being at UCLA really kind of sparked that interest for me. And while I was there, I actually didn't touch VR at all. I was not interested in it. It made me sick. I just didn't want any part of it for the most part. But I was experimenting a lot with video, and I was doing a lot of things with glitch work and the grief, loss, and mourning videos. And I just kind of sat around in the studio and started working on these different processes to just experiment with what video could do well, how you could sort of break it, and ended up coming up with a process that, see if I can get this to play, maybe not, that involved just glitching it, running it through a Max MSP patch, and then rendering it out in a couple different ways. And eventually led to something that was not part of my MFA thesis, but was something that ended up becoming much better than my MFA thesis. So I ended up getting a gallery contract right after graduation, which was really exciting. But about a week before the show, they asked for it to be interactive. And immediately I was like, oh my God, what do I do? Is this an Arduino project? What is this gonna be? And I had been working with Ben a little bit, and we decided that we would try to make a VR piece out of it. So that's kind of how we ended up working together. But I'll let Ben introduce himself a little bit, and we can talk a little bit about how Float came to be.
Sure. Hey. So my background is computer science and fine art. I went to school and couldn't decide which one I wanted to do. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But growing up, I always had an interest in both of those. So that's what I continued to do there. basically, while I was at school, I got involved in VR lab on accident. So this was like around late 90s, early 2000s, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But yeah, I was doing weird stuff in VR back then, and after I graduated, was like, this stuff is really cool, but nobody's going to see this for like I don't know how long. You know, it's completely inaccessible to normal people. So I'd rather work in video games. So I did that for quite a while. And have always kind of been interested in the fringes of that. So I worked for Electronic Arts, and my first game was, you know, World War II shooter. No surprise, but not necessarily my thing. More interested in like the artistic and, you know, emotional textures you can get out of interactive things. So yeah, I'll go through a little bit of that. Yes, here's the lab at Iowa State University. Basically, while I was there, they were building this facility, which is in the middle of an atrium, and these things sticking out are to house all the projectors. This was a six-sided cave. For those of you who know what that is, and you'd step inside, it'd close behind you, and then you were fully immersed with shutter glasses synced to the projectors. So that was super cool, and I actually got involved because I was in the art program. They had lots of engineers, but they didn't have anybody who was doing anything art related. And they're like, "Oh, you can model? You should come in here." And so I would do art projects in there, and you know, cause trouble. Most of it was not any good, but I was learning. So yeah, I basically after school I got into the industry. This is a project you'll never actually see because it got canceled. However, it was super cool. Steven Spielberg was actually at the head of that, and it was kind of a cinematic action-adventure game, and this was like a dream project for me. So this was immediately after the World War II shooter game project. I worked on this for about 2 years, and kind of became an honorary member of the design team. I was programming first, and then they kind of started roping me more into that stuff, and so that really taught me a lot about how difficult it was to do characters in a digital format. We were trying to do this is like really advanced AI, you know, high fidelity, something that you could maybe relate to as a peer rather than like a dumb video game character with a robot mouth. So yeah, it was ambitious, and yeah, you won't see it, but I can talk at length about it. So after EA, I went into independent games. I worked on this game with a couple of friends who had also worked at EA. This is a quirky strategy game called Skulls of the Shogun, and I did like programming, writing on it, a bunch of design stuff, technical art, that kind of stuff, a little of everything. The core team was 3 people for some time, and our intent with it really was to do something accessible to strategy, to bring people into strategy games who really hadn't touched them before. And it looks like a real-time strategy game because there's no grid, but it's actually turn-based for you strategy folks. So it ended up shipping on lots of platforms, and for a while it was one of the top-rated iOS games on Metacritic, which was very cool and kind of a shock. So as that was wrapping up, I kind of got involved in VR. This was around the time of the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, and I didn't even back it myself. I kind of forgot that I had done VR before, and I was like, I don't know, we'll see. But a friend of mine did, and I played with his kit and started getting involved in it. And so through that, actually the folks that started WEVR, turns out I used to work at EA, so I knew them, and they were doing VR stuff, and I got involved in them. So really, this was kind of one of the key early experiences on the Vive, which most of you probably know is a high-end headset, and it's one of the kind of first examples of like, hey, we can do VR and not make people sick. We can do good hardware, good software design such that, you know, most people won't feel any sort of nausea, which was really exciting. So I was a lead engineer on this, and also kind of responsible for all the feel, what we call feel, I guess, being in the water, you know, bubbles, sounds, like how do you trick the brain into feeling like you're under the water. So around that time, I was also working on my passion project, which is called Rational Exuberance, and that was really my playground for figuring out what I thought VR was good at. So just throwing things against the wall and seeing what worked. And I developed, a lot of opinions about what I think VR is good and bad at least in the short term right now with the technologies that we have. So it's set in space, and it's kind of cerebral and very much driven by curiosity. So you're not really told anything; you're just sort of thrown into it. It kind of responds to you as you look around and try to interact with the world. So back to float.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, so that's kind of, it was the collaboration with the gallery piece that kind of led us to this. We ended up like bringing some of my just 2D single channel video, which again was shooting florals and running it. Actually I projected glitched video onto the florals, shot that, ran that through a MXP or Max MSP jitter patch. Use that as frames to then be animated inside of Unity. So it was this really strange kind of convoluted process, but it ended up being something pretty interesting. So we just, kind of worked out a couple different sort of spatial orientations and interactive ideas that kind of seemed to make sense to us. We sort of just had fun with it. We had about a week or two, I think, to put the whole thing together. And we ended up with a piece essentially dealing with visual music and optical illusion, which was called 3VR, and then we realized that was a terrible name. Changed it to liminal realities because it dealt a lot with liminal spaces. Here's another still from that. And what was kind of interesting about it, though, is that we made this piece in about a week, just experimenting with the things that we knew how to do and like playing off of both of our strengths. So a lot of just Ben's like knowledge of interactivity and VR, and a lot of the work I had done in video. And I had a background in the humanities and like religious studies and things too, so I was really interested in kind of pushing these bounds of liminal spaces. But the project ended up kind of growing legs and walking away, which is a very good thing. We ended up taking it kind of around the world in a lot of different festivals. It was in a lot of different exhibitions. Eventually became part of Marina Abramovic, Jeff Koons, and Olafur Eliasson's platform, Acute Art. We were one of their emerging artists on their platform. That was a shock to have that happen. Very, very interesting. Anish Kapoor is also now one of the people that are involved with this. So one of the main sort of interactions that worked really well with this and that people really seem to respond to is the fact that, again, like it's dealing with optical illusion, you essentially can go into some of the work and be brought into the different levels through portals. And hopefully this will load. There we go. And so one of the reasons this is kind of successful is it's a one-to-one movement. It's very comfortable. You're generally allowed to kind of move through the work in a very normal way. It tracks you very well. It's essentially like being in a gallery space.
So yeah, the intention from the beginning was, we had a gallery, just white box gallery that we were projecting our videos on. So we wanted to start from that frame of reference for the VR piece, and we had people putting on the headset saying like, where'd all the people go? Because it mapped very directly to the real space. But then to kind of be a bit transgressive about how we relate to art. So like when you approach the work in real space and you're actually walking around the real gallery, the work responds to you in a way that it couldn't otherwise. And the original piece was not using the controllers at all. So you can see he's moving around and it's just responding to where your viewpoint is. Everything's based on that. And it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, this was, as you can see, this was not far from here. We had it in something called Oculus Dev Lab, which I'll talk about here in a second. But yeah, this was someone who tried it and was like, having a good time, clearly bumping up against a bunch of other people, really getting into it. It did have this transgressive nature, kind of as Ben said. You're allowing people to, like, yes, you're being tracked one-to-one, but you're allowed to stick your head into the artwork, which ordinarily that is a taboo thing. You should not do that in a gallery.
So do you feel like you're like in a bubble?
Kind of, yeah.
Because it's what he's seeing is what you just showed, this bubble
Yeah.
that's coming out and out and out.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
every way
Actually,
you-
I'll back that up.
with the headset on, every way you're looking, you're seeing.
Yeah, you're essentially just immersed in this like sort of color bath and sound bath. So,
That's really cool.
yeah.
So the core thing is really like transformations between two-dimensional and three-dimensional,
Uh-huh.
and exploring different aspects of that based all on like where you are.
But I like that word color back. That's
Yeah. So we ended up as a part of this Oculus and Kaleidoscope Dev Lab a couple years ago with a bunch of other really lovely folks. And here's a list of some of the people that we worked with as well. It was kind of interesting because they would have us meet with these different advisors, people from immersive theater to journalism, experience design, folks at Sony Music, advanced technology over at Morphosis, our friend Karenza Harris, who is an architect that we're working with. And really, if it hadn't been for her, our project wouldn't have turned into essentially the next iteration. So now we're working on something called the Float Museum, which had its basis in that piece, liminal realities. So we're working to kind of create a virtual reality platform, sort of the virtual gallery space in a sense. Ours differs a little bit from what Acute Art and what some of the other galleries are trying to do, in the sense that we're kind of dealing with this idea of Marcos Novak's liquid architecture, if any of you guys are familiar with that. We're trying to build a lot of these pieces inside of an algorithmic, parametrically just growing architecture that changes based on time of day, changes on the amount of people looking at it, can change based on the seasons. It's really kind of, up to us exactly how far we're going to push that. But it's a really fascinating concept in general. And so we're kind of taking his ideas and his concepts and building off of that. So we've got a couple different artists several different artists that we're working with right now, heavily leaning in the UCLA direction because that's my home. But yes, we have people like Jennifer Steinkamp, Rafik Anadol, and Casey Reese, who is a creator of processing, along with Ben Fry. So we have those artists coming and creating pieces sort of in collaboration with us to be housed inside of this virtual architecture. And so what we did kind of coming out of the Dev Lab was to actually pilot this at a place. So we worked with SF MoMA and Kaleidoscope to create a sort of pilot program during, I think was it 2017? It was. Yeah, it was during GDC in 2017, which I can't believe was only last year. But I thought I'd try to play you guys this video. Hopefully sound's working. Oh, maybe we don't have sound. I mean, you probably don't need too much. We can sort of narrate it for you. But we worked with Kaleidoscope. I'm not sure if anybody heard of Kaleidoscope before? Yeah. So we worked a lot with them to be a part of this and kind of run a live version of the Float Museum out of SF MoMA. So we actually had hired actors to work as sort of virtual docents, and we also had a multiplayer version of the piece. So people would come in to this sort of back room. Oh, maybe we do have sound. Maybe? Or maybe that's something else. But we had a lot of success with it. It was a lot of fun. We learned a lot. We had people come in and they could choose which piece they wanted to see. We had sort of two versions or two pieces that people could look at, ours and Isaac Cohen's or Kabibo's. And the virtual docent would meet you inside the space and walk you around and walk you through the artwork. So it was really interesting. It was really a lot of this work was done with. Sorry, I cut you off. It's okay. You can narrate it in a second. But yeah, we worked a lot with Karenza to actually do the physical build out of this. We had everything from little tokens and physical artifacts that people could get after the fact. This is a little animated artifact. It was likened a little bit to Twin Peaks in that you were sort of it was like going into the Black Lodge and coming out, which was kind of funny. Kind of talking about liminal spaces a little bit, and just the ritual nature of going to a museum and putting on the headset and going through this experience. But really now we've just, we're trying to make this become a reality with, in a couple ways. Like still kind of doing something that we want to show on Steam. We're working with WEVR, which we'll talk about in a second. But these are some of the artists that we've reached out to. So again, like Jennifer, Casey, the couple other artists that aren't local to California, like Sarah Ludi and Sabrina Rattay, incredible video artists, and Rafiq Anadol as well. And of course, more TBA, because we would like to do a lot of different exhibits sort of as time goes on. So we could actually like talk about this, I think, for a really, really, really long time. But I'll pass this off to you because it's a longer conversation.
I mean, part of the intention for the Float Museum is to collaborate with artists who think about, space and perception and like have a practice in these areas that are like really relevant to VR, but that like maybe aren't already working in it or haven't really thought about it as an important thing. Mainly because the collaboration we did with Liminal Realities was something that neither one of us would have done by ourselves, and so that collaboration produced something that was like completely different than either of us had done before, and so that was like wait. So if we collaborated with other artists, maybe this would keep happening, and this seems like an important avenue. And it also needs kind of a home to live. Like we're like, where do you put this stuff? Like how do we frame it? Where does it live in the world? And that's why we kind of were like, okay, encouraged by Kaleidoscope also to kind of like formalize it and make it like, okay, what is the bigger version of this? And so. That's kind of where it comes from, and there's a lot of other stuff to unpack there. Like it started, a lot of what I think about is single player experiences, because I think there's actually, it's a good fit for VR, and there's some really powerful things you can do with it. But in our SF MoMA prototype, we made it multiplayer, so you could have other people in there, and that's why earlier you saw people holding controllers so that they could wave to each other and start communicating, which is a completely different, it's also very powerful, but it's a completely different design and set of problems. So this is just kind of a slight break in terms of like the possibilities for art and design in general when it comes to some of these technologies. So we're talking a lot about VR. We're working in AR. We're working across technologies, but one of the ways that we've been thinking about it is there's a lot of different pre-existing disciplines in art, right? And a lot of traditions, and kind of with these technologies, this kind of for the most part be captured and brought into VR, especially as the fidelity goes up. It's kind of like this potentially a wrapper for any of these other things, right? We've got new ways of seeing sculpture and installation art. Like it's pretty clear how a lot of that can come through, and that's super cool because now it's very accessible and it's can be distributed easily in ways that it couldn't otherwise be. So that's really great. But VR itself kind of provides these capabilities which are easily accessible. It's just kind of out of the box. You can have access to people's voice and collaborative components, and just the precision tracking capabilities. So there's kind of a suite of things that you can start thinking about. Okay, well that how does that affect some of these other disciplines which really haven't, what does voice mean when applied to graphic design? I don't know. Or maybe it's interesting. And so that's like just kind of a whole other set of concerns. And you can kind of think of that as a feedback loop that's starting to happen between these mediums, and they can start merging and overlapping, and kind of start to point to new possibilities. The way that we can combine these that we haven't been able to can represent a lot of like new work that just isn't really classified in the way it has been before. And so this is kind of what happened with Liminal Realities, which there's about 10 different ways to talk about that project, I think. And it doesn't make sense outside of VR, really. It's spatial illusions. It's things that are like responding to your position in space, and the difference between standing here standing here actually matters, right? Like, I don't, maybe I just don't have the language to describe that yet, but we think that's really interesting. So that's kind of the, oh yeah, we just kind of went crazy. Maybe these are genres of the future.
Yeah, no, Ben had a lot of fun coming up with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I looked into the future, and this is actually so, yeah.
Cool.
Now on to some of our
Go ahead.
current work. Yeah, so the Holodome is as alluded to earlier, is kind of a, they've got an installation up at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle right now, and they're just kind of starting to roll this out. It's kind of like a mini dome that you go into with 4 or 5 of your friends. And they kind of call it like social VR without a headset. It's not stereo, so like to me it's like, it's kind of, you know, it's closer to 360 video, but it's like social in a way. It's an interesting format, and they want to do some art stuff in there, so we're thinking how do we apply kind of the Float Museum principles and work with some of these artists in that context. And although it is you know, fundamentally kind of like a projection 360 space, they are using like Vive controllers and blob tracking and depth mapping to enable like creativity in that space and interactivity. So how can we, you know, use interactive in that format in a way that you know, doesn't feel tacked on and that like feels right to that technology.
Yeah, I mean, we feel pretty lucky that we're able to do this. I mean, funding for the arts is very difficult, and the fact that, you know, Paul Allen was a very big collector, very big supporter of the arts and music too, and like the fact that he wanted to, you know, fund us a little bit to make some really cool art is kind of amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the themes you might notice through this is like we're kind of doing this.
Yeah, turns out arts funding is difficult. So. Yeah, it's just kind of a fly through of.
So this is another kind of.
Oh, there's some, a little bit. I can turn it down a little bit.
So this is another experiment in bringing art into VR in a way that like we hadn't done before. So the artist Juan Corrado passed away in 2010, and the estate was looking to kind of like preserve his legacy and kind of take it into the future. So we took his paintings and tried spatializing them in different ways. And what's really great about his work is it's I guess what's called intrarealism, which is sort of a combination of abstract expressionism and
Surrealism.
Yeah. So when you look at his work, actually, we don't have an example.
Just the background.
Yeah, the background is a little bit. It's very very lush. There's a lot of detail, and it looks abstract, and then you're like, wait, I think I see something. And just that kind of like dynamic, we were like, okay, this I think would be really cool in VR. So we spatialized the paintings in different ways, and made it so you can sort of surf and fly through these landscapes. And it's kind of a work in progress, but it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, it was down at Miami Art Week last year as part of Scope's art fair, and then did a tour of Spain earlier this year, which was we didn't get to go, but like the artwork got to go, so that's exciting. Yeah, currently kind of like still in the works, but it was a really interesting process to kind of like work with the estate and work with paintings and find a way to do them justice. Like the painter's no longer with us, so how do we make something that's true to his vision and, you know, still kind of make sense and is interesting. Oh, sure. Yeah. So this happened towards the end of the summer and into actually September. We were asked to be in an art show in LA at a gallery called Launch LA, and it was for this show called She, which was basically about female embodiment. And so we created this piece called The Still Unravished Bride, which is an augmented reality piece based off of if anybody knows Marion Woodman, she was this really, I find, very interesting Jungian psychoanalyst. She wrote this book called Addiction to Perfection, The Still Unravished Bride, back in the 80s. And it's a lot of things that we sort of, these concepts that we sort of know and sort of take for granted in a way, like just this unhealthy pursuit of perfection in women and men, and just the idea of the psyche-soma split. We kind of took those ideas and brought them into AR. So we have a couple, we have some videos that we have still need to upload, but we also have a piece that we can show you a little bit later, a version of it where you can place these sort of headless mannequins around within the gallery space or wherever you want, and you can also project archival footage onto them. And this is kind of a shot also. You can disable the camera feed and get kind of this nice sort of like lovely feedback that happens. Then for the video piece itself, because there was both video and the AR piece, I was putting little bits of Marion Woodman's book kind of at the bottom of it. So, yeah.
So this is a actually, let's see if this works. We basically collaborated with Strange Loop on a visual album for the Glitch Mob, which was released I guess maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And so we did one of the tracks on that, which was, and again, it's kind of interesting to take. We really took our real-time techniques that we've been developing in Unity and basically applying those to video formats. And so, it didn't start as VR at all. Actually, it's just a flat traditional music video. But then they did actually do another round. Let's see. So yeah, this is, if you want to watch this, it's the whole thing is online on YouTube. It's about an hour, and our piece is,
That's part of it. Yeah.
It's like here. So it's very like kind of. What's that?
Oh, the ad is just funny. Yeah.
Slow and dreamy. Probably not.
Yeah, so you kind of fly through this terrain, and there's these lovely sort of like opalescent, like lava sort of bits that happen at the end.
So yeah, they took this and put it in the WEVR, which is kind of an ongoing like concert event series that brings people together to have a concert-like experience in VR. And they did like, I don't know, maybe like 3 tracks from this. They brought them into VR and kind of adapted them, which makes a lot of sense because the whole concept for the album and the visual work is basically, yeah, if you watch it, you'll see the themes. It's all like VR and going into other
realms.
worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we've also had a few different commissions with Standard Vision, which I mentioned, and we still have an outstanding piece, like outstanding in the sense I still have to give it to them, that's due here very shortly. But we did a piece with them called Prismatic Paradise, which is here on the Wilshire Grand, and here also outside of the Marriott at LA Live. It's really incredible to be able to see your work that size on such a venue. But this went over really well. They wanted to work with us again, so we've got another piece that we're finishing up shortly called Bloom, which again is like a lot of Unity experiments that we've been doing, kind of heavily relying on Unity, and like I also have a love for anything floral, so it's kind of just like floral times 1,000. But that showed, a version of it showed in July, and then hopefully we'll have another chance to show it again soon.
So this is the project that we just recently kind of pitched to Google. It's called Dark Light, and it's based around their AR core platform. So we did a 2-day game jam and produced something in that time, which is, anyone who's done a game jam knows it's a feat in and of itself. And we made it through the first round. It's kind of got a darker, like Stranger Things, Twin Peaks vibe to it. So this is a character from it who's in another dimension and is trying to get back. So he's kind of started to integrate and cross over with another alien civilization, but he's trying to get back. And we kind of, this is another experiment in a new way of working, because they gave us some resources to keep developing the pitch, and so we brought in some other people to work on narrative and do the concept art. That's not my concept art. I wish it was. So we had about 3 weeks to kind of like pull that together into something that made sense. And the kind of core mechanic or premise of it is using image recognition, which can be done on the fly. So you basically start the app and scan. Everybody scans their own image. So I might be playing with multiple people in here, like 5 of you, and it'd be like, okay, generate an image, take a photo, draw something, and then we capture each of those, and those each become like a tool or a token to kind of access this alternate dimension. And so you can place those around the room, open portals, which artifacts like that might slip through those portals. And then once they're in the room, they're kind of like floating around, and you can use those same images to manipulate those shapes within the space.
Yeah, and really the whole, like the impetus for this whole thing was ARCore really wanted to have more work that was multiplayer, so people just, so like both AR, just staring at your phone, and VR can be very isolating, and so their whole sort of I guess intent with this was to see if they could put it out to independent developers and just find out if there's a way to just actually have people play together using our phones on these ubiquitous devices. And I think our piece does that really well. So we'll know by Friday, so keep your fingers crossed for us. But yeah.
Yeah, and so there's always kind of like multiplayer in the sense of like, hey, we all have the fanciest phone, we can all play, AR together, and that's really cool, and we want to do a lot of stuff with that. But part of our intention with this is how do we play together? If only one of us has that phone that can do that, how can we all kind of participate in an experience? And if you take a photo with your non-AR phone, you could still use that. The other person can scan that, and we can have like interactions and play a game together without requiring like all this heavy technology.
Yeah, and this is also a really interesting project. Well, I think I was going to say for me, but I think for us both, because like I don't tend to work with narrative that often, at least not with like a very linear narrative, and we kind of had to for this a little bit. And we brought in someone who is actually, I don't want to say self-styled, but brought somebody who is a mythologist, is a creative writer, and kind of helped us shape what this piece was going to be. So it was interesting. It was very collaborative in that sense. So we had the concept artist and the mythologist and a couple other developers all collaborating with us on this narrative piece that we, again, like not usually something we do, but we're pretty proud of where it's going, I think.
Yeah, and some of that is like design related. So we have done some AR work before, and it's very easy to kind of collapse that into like, well, it's VR and AR are very similar, and in some ways they are, but in a design sense, we found that there's a lot of like important differences, and phone-based AR in particular is it's really not like having a headset on, right? Your peripheral vision is so small, and the ability for you to kind of direct people through that window is a lot more limited, and so some of our kind of workarounds for that is like, okay, we have to kind of like, this might not be a game at all, actually. It might be like kind of a collaborative story experience, right? Where you're kind of more or less told what to do, but you've never been doing, you're moving through this room in a way that you never have before. So you need like kind of a lot of assistance in that, and the scientist kind of helps with that role. And we think that that's still going to be fun. So it's not really meant to be like a puzzle game, where you get stuck all the time and you're like, yeah, I don't know what to do. But it's this like kind of evolving set of circumstances that happen with him, and this kind of liminal, or another liminal reality.
Another liminal reality. Yes.
So this is another.
Yeah, sure. I get really excited about VR screensavers. Not a sentence I thought I would ever say, but it's true. So this is a project, kind of a pet project of ours, that is sort of a marriage of like art, net art, and media history, specifically like computer history. For those of you guys that are aware, like everybody knows what screensavers are. Incidentally, this was just sent to me today and I had to put it in because I thought it was actually kind of funny. So system autonomy and unpredictability, screensavers both pretty high. The minute you get to player agency, dips down pretty low. We're changing that. So we're actually, with this piece, we're taking a lot of these old sort of like, Windows, and if anybody knows After Dark, like the flying toasters, like that sort of idea of screensavers and bringing them into a 3D space. So again, like kind of part of this, media history that I don't think that many people think about, but I actually spent a lot, like, to me, they're very nostalgic. Like I grew up with After Dark and like some of these Windows pipes, like you see here, and finding ways to kind of bring those into VR is kind of something Ben started doing on his own back a while ago, and was something sort of similar to what I wanted to explore in grad school a little bit. So we actually made some headway this summer working towards this. I'll go ahead and play this while I talk. I can get it to. This is our E3 trailer. So you essentially get, you have this, you have a computer set up, you kind of get sucked into the screensavers, and there you can actually control them. Like you can control like how large they are, how small they are, how much of them that there actually is. It's really a lot of fun. And we also decided to kind of like just make it even that much stranger and add academic, sort of the academic take on it. So we have, we're talking to Ian Bogos at The Atlantic and my former professor Erki Hutamo at UCLA about essentially writing essays about screensavers and like the beginning of generative animation and sort of implanting those inside of the executable. So the idea is that you'll be able to download a pack of these screensavers and then also be able to access these essays as well. We have a residency coming up at the University of Colorado in Boulder, at the Media Archaeology Lab as well, probably in January. The date's still TBD, but that's where I'm going to get to go sit and actually play through a lot of the old screensavers again. I mean, I haven't really since I was like 9, so it'll be kind of cool to do that. But it's a really, it's a really exciting project that is also kind of lives in the same sort of just weird projects that we enjoy, and that like has maybe a niche audience, but we hope will kind of like broaden out.
Yeah, I mean, it started like a lot of our projects too, which is just like a tiny idea. In this case, it was kind of a joke. It was like the pipes were always, I remember staring at it, like I want to be in there, and I just like was transfixed. And so just building the first version of that in like a day, I was like, this is a really dumb idea, I don't know why I'm doing this. but then once you actually see it, you're like, okay, there might be something here, and so revisiting the idea of a screensaver and kind of exploding it into like the possibilities for these media is really interesting because it like we have a lot of practical applications for VR, but we don't really know what good entertainment looks like yet. At least we don't have a lot of examples of that, and I think it's interesting to use this as kind of a baseline because it sort of doesn't suggest a super interactive world, right? Like you're just there to like take it in, right? And but that gives us the excuse to like sneak a lot of like fun stuff in there that you're not expecting, and even seeing the stuff in stereo is cool and opens up. So. Yeah.
So we showed a version of this. This is actually from E3, but like got interviewed on the BBC for it, and ended up getting a lot of press for it that I was really happy about, but also wasn't expecting. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's actually, I have high hopes for it because like, I mean, screensavers themselves actually are a really amazing thing. Like, okay, well, I'll say, so summer 2018 is actually not exactly true, but that's fine. But the fact that they were a place that a lot of, computer scientists and animators could just go test ideas out back in the day, that's again what we're doing here. So it's kind of just like the next version of us, just testing the waters with what's fun to do in VR. So, want to talk about Vibrant Matter?
Okay.
Oops, sorry, I'm replaying. There we go.
All right, a couple more projects. So Vibrant Matter is a piece that we started in 2017 with within. which is Chris Milk and Aaron Koblen's company. They wanted to do a music video, interactive music video, and they had known about us, I think through a couple avenues. They knew Irrational Exuberance, which I had released, and were fans of that. So that was, it's still in progress. We haven't released this yet. We kind of were originally targeting mobile headsets, which, to be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of. I'm like, I want 6 degrees of freedom tracking, or get out of here.
Or get out. 6 off or get out. 6
off or go home. But we were trying to figure out, okay, what interesting mechanics can we do in this space that still feel good. So we did a premiere of this at South by Southwest, which was just kind of a sliver of the whole thing. And then since then, basically kind of like ran out of funding for various reasons. And Within has been super cool about it. They let us have the rights to it. So we're kind of like reimagining it as a 6 degree of freedom experience. We actually have a prototype that we can show folks as well, which is kind of like remixing our own work and taking all the stuff we built for that, which does have narrative elements. It's kind of like exploring memories and kind of, again, exploding that and pulling it back together in a way that makes sense for this, for the Vive or Oculus formats. And it's been a very interesting project because one of the key things that we wanted to do was like collaborate with a musician. So the musician on this is Juan, who we're big fans of, and we were hoping to like collaborate very deeply. And this happens a lot, but we ended up just getting a track thrown over the fence. And so again, we kind of had to like, how can we pull this apart and make it interactive? And we worked with a really great producer based in LA who kind of recreated the track from the ground up. His name is Eris. And he did an amazing job, and it's just like whatever we need, he's building that, and so it's kind of made of these like loopable segments that change based on kind of what you're doing in the experience, and it will come out someday. We still care a lot about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you can skip that if you want.
All right, more stuff about that.
Yeah, and I mean, this is visual music is I don't know if any of you guys know what that is or what that genre is, but it's kind of a 20th century. It comes out of 20th century, like Oscar Fischinger, Walter Ruttmann, people like that, Mary Ellen Butte, and a lot of our work kind of is looking to that as inspirations. And so we have a lot of musician friends based out of LA that we are either sort of starting to do work with or are like about to do work with. Like we're going to work with Juju on a music video coming up, I believe next month. Then we had the Glitch Mob and Strange Loop piece, and then some of these other artists that we're working with as well. So this is like a big interest for us and a big inspiration and something that drives, I think, a lot of what we're doing too. So so stay tuned. There'll be some stuff coming from these folks as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can go deep on like any of this stuff, but like sound design and audio is such a huge part of these. I mean, coming from games, that it always has been, and it always kind of gets like the lowest. It's the thing that gets cut off or the least amount of resources in terms of games. And then when you apply it to immersive media, I think it's even more important. It's really it's the thing that can really just take something from like it's okay to like feeling real and like legitimate and like an authentic experience.
Cool.
All right.
That was just for you guys, really. Also, well, okay, for us too, because I kind of think it's funny, but yeah. Also that. So.
Yeah.
We actually. I could stare at that GIF for hours. Anyways. But yeah, so thanks again for having us here. Hopefully we can answer any questions you might have or, so leave that up to hang out in the background.
We'll be doing some demos as well.
Yeah.
So we're kind of based over in Karma and also the Robo Arts Gym. So we'll have some times later this afternoon and tomorrow that you can check out some more work.
This is not our work, but I wish it was.
Yeah. This is where we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right. Start clapping for us.
So that's good. Juan and for you guys
what aspects really kind of got you going?
I mean, I think for me it was like, seeing irrational exuberance, because I was a skeptic. I was like, I had tried some of the old Oculus stuff and I'm very sensitive to a lot of VR stuff and just motion in general. And so I was very skeptical, but trying irrational exuberance and seeing that like there's some really beautiful things that you can make in this. And then of course having the deadline of like, I have a show in a week, what am I gonna do? And like panicking to Ben, and then just, really being able to just sort of workshop something and seeing it turn out well and have it really be just far beyond anything I thought it could be. And it was a way for me to see my work in a completely different way too. I mean, everything I had made up until that point, I'm used to just staring at a screen, very, very 2D. And so to see my work in any sort of 3D space, like interactive like that too, was really, really great.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in games and kind of always found that, there's a lot of, if you're in the independent game scene, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening and there's some really amazing things there. But, a lot of like, if you're not plugged into that, like you just don't know what's happening. And people, the way they think about games and interactive software is very, one-dimensional. It's like, well, I don't play games because I don't play Angry Birds or Call of Duty. Like that's kind of it for a lot of people. We know it can do a lot more than that. It can represent a lot more and have a lot more expression and represent a lot, more, generate a lot more feelings and like just be much more expansive than that. And kind of the second time I got into VR was really like this, I don't know, I'm kind of hesitant. I played with the Oculus Rift and it was interesting, but not really the answer. But I kind of kept working with it just to see what would happen, because it did feel like this opportunity to take all the design stuff that had been really like crystallized and all the structures that had been built up around games and like throw it all out and start over, because a lot of that stuff doesn't work in VR anymore. So yeah, I was like, okay, this is a chance to kind of like upset the apple cart a little bit, and I still think that's true. I mean, you can sort of see that pattern emerging already, though. There's already like, the standard for VR is like wave-based shooters where you stand in one place and do this, which is a little depressing to me. But yeah, I think there's a lot more that we can do with it. And I mean, any of these immersive technologies, but VR is kind of like this. It's a platform of a combination of technologies that like is kind of becoming widely distributed. So it's really untapped and exciting.
How do you recommend individuals who are new to the field to get started and acquainted?
I mean, I think there's a lot of workshops out there now, but I was actually really surprised by how much there is just on like lynda.com or just the stuff that Unity offers. There's actually quite a bit. I do think that there is a lot of noise as well, so it is kind of hard sometimes to find the quality tutorials, which maybe you can speak to a little bit, but.
Well, yeah, I don't like tutorials anymore.
But I mean, yeah.
But I do think that taking some classes or starting to watch some of these things concerning Unity. Unity is a good one just because the source, the community is very like open and there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of plugins and things that mean you don't have to program at all. You can just try some stuff, and it can be really intimidating, but it's also very you don't need to know all of it, right? Like in order to put something on the screen, you download one plugin and hit play basically, and stuff starts happening, right? So. I've been using Unity for years, and there's parts of it that I never touch, right? So like, although somebody might say, okay, this guy's an expert, like there's certain aspects I just don't, like as part of our practice, we never use. And so I think, starting to play with it and see what's interesting to you and like just using that to drive your to push through like, the roadblocks that you're gonna hit and get excited about, very specific things. Because, a lot of the work that that works really well is focused on like one idea. Like liminal realities was really about these transformations and involving you in that loop. And Screensavers is obviously a very focused idea as well.
Very focused. But I mean, I think the point that the community is like just very helpful too is a good one. I mean, so if there's like a piece out there that you're at all curious about, I feel like you could probably just like tweet at or email the person, and they'd probably just be like, pretty willing to help you or to walk you through it. But
so my question is about the quantum transfer illusion, and for like people who doesn't know, like have not heard the term, it's this illusion that happens when your brain is presented with like stimuli that you think that you're in an environment that you're actually physically not, and this is like kind of because I think why people when they're in VR experiences and moving heights start trembling, or when they're interacting with metallic objects in VR, they expect to feel that like calm feeling. And what do you think this means for like a VR designer? Because it feels like a powerful tool that a designer to have to make people induce like such a powerful illusion. And is this a blessing, or is this a curse, or is it a little more? And what ethical considerations, if any, are there involved in this?
yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I think it's both a blessing and a curse. Like, a lot of ways that you might be able to speak to a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I could rant about this for a while. I mean, there's like, for example, a lot of horror experiences, which is fine. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but the difference between like being inside of an experience and that stuff happening to you is completely different. And feeling like it might actually be happening to you is very different than seeing it on a screen. And I think our language isn't very nuanced surrounding this stuff, right? So it's just like, well, if I like horror movies, then I probably like horror VR, right? And I don't necessarily think that's the case, right? I think it's a very different proposition. And I think that there is a lot of like just very, gross, sort of like rough, like people just throwing stuff against the wall or trying to get a rise out of people because like, that's a quick, it's easy, right? Like I know exactly where you're looking, right? And I can put anything right here. Like, it's very easy to scare people. I turn around and see, it doesn't actually matter what I put there. It'd probably be scary. But I do think we have a responsibility, and part of what rational exuberance tries to do is give you some boundaries that like allow you to push yourself. So like there are extreme. You're in space, right? So like the heights don't really get any taller than that. But it's not like necessarily forcing you to like interact with it in a certain way, right? It's like if you want to push those boundaries, you can. And I think that's interesting, right? Like giving people space to kind of explore their own limits or their own kind of feelings about a particular relationship or space. And that's exciting to me. And giving people like that opportunity seems really cool. But kind of forcing it on them, or to like not really tell somebody what's going to happen in an experience if it is like very aggressive or challenging, I think is it can be problematic. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure at some point we'll get more like official sort of standards in place that help people understand how to relate to this stuff. But I think PTSD is like could certainly be triggered by this stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's also like a case of it being used for good too. Like a lot of veterans that have used VR for PTSD symptoms and like re-immersing themselves in those experiences to kind of like, yes, relive it to a certain extent, but also kind of in a therapeutic sense and like face those fears. So I mean, there is a good case for that there, I think, as well. Does anybody know Harun Faroki's work? He's got he's got some lovely video art pieces that kind of talk a little bit about that. So highly recommend that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of our work often gets, kind of, people ask if it's been used for therapy or it's been, there's meditative qualities to it. And I think a lot of that is because it's on demand, it's interactive, but it doesn't like put a bunch of goals and demands on top of you. And like, so you can just kind of hang out and just take it all in. And that's something that like, turns out it's kind of meditative when like most of the time in the real world, you never stop and take the real world in anymore, you're like this. So even that quality, giving people space to do that seems useful, right?
So you guys are in LA. How far is Hollywood going with this? How much have they embraced this? Because it absolutely, I mean, to Khan's point, I mean, when you're in these headsets, like, have you been to Jeremy Bailenson lab yet?
Not yet,
Not yet.
no.
You have to go
Yeah,
there.
right.
You are in a completely different world, and so the power of persuasion and empathy and transforming you into a completely different place, like PTSD place, or, I mean, your color bath there, it's like going on an acid trip without dropping acid. Not that I didn't know about that. It seems like it's a totally, I mean, do you think it's going to become a new form of entertainment? And how soon will we see something like that?
I mean, yeah, we talk about this a lot because it's, in some ways, yeah. So Hollywood has kind of jumped on the bandwagon quite a bit in some ways, but there are a lot of the pieces maybe haven't been fully thought out. Would be maybe the best way to say that, or they're just they're not that inventive. Like they're kind of just takes off of like the latest Avengers experience or something, but it's not really that interactive, which is usually what you probably want in something like that. So I kind of feel like there's a lot of commercial work out there sort of based off of certain IPs. I think it's getting there, and I kind of hope it continues to kind of get pushed in that direction, but a lot of it we haven't really seen a lot of them that take that much of a risk. Then the other sort of part of that is I don't know if any of you guys have been to the Void or any of the location-based entertainment pieces, but like this idea that now going to see VR is kind of like going to see the movies. Like you go to a theater to experience it, and I think part of that was also financial decision on their parts, was like just seeing if they could like move a lot of this through ticket sales. And I actually didn't really see that coming. It kind of has taken off quite a bit recently. Like IMAX has a like a VR. I don't know, what would you call it? It's not even really arcade, I guess. Yeah. There is, of course, stuff at Dave & Buster's, which makes sense, and then the Void as well. But I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of that is, it's understandable. The business is really complicated of it, and in our discussions with people, we're trying to do things which are like not necessarily easy to articulate. It's like, well, you want to check out some optical illusions and spatial, I don't know, spatial insanity. I don't know. So the challenge is like, how do you get people to see the work in sort of a mass, format, and in real numbers, and a lot of Hollywood is they've got formulas, and they're sort of just plugging this into that formula, and it's it makes sense, like we all saw it coming, but it's also, to me, it's a little bit like, if VR succeeds, it's going to be in spite of some of that, because we do have these like, a few examples of like, okay, this is something like really unique that can only happen here. Whereas a lot of that stuff is like, it'd actually be better if I was just playing on a screen,
yeah,
or watching the movie or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit of what Paul Allen was trying to do with the Holodome too, because like you can get more people through it at any given time, and like they've tried documentaries, they've got narrative experiences, and it's all very interesting actually. But I mean, I was kind of a little bit disparaging with what I said about like, the LBE, the location-based entertainment. But I will say that I did go to the Void sort of against, like, I didn't really want to go. I kind of got drugged there, with its research, we need to go. And I had a great time. It was super fun. And it was a Ghostbusters experience where you get to like, be a Ghostbuster, and who doesn't want to do that? So like, that was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's very informative. I'm just building on Professor's point. I'm very interested in, for example, knowing the difference between, so if we were to present it with a piece of art inside the VR world, how is it different from, for example, we're presented with an animation or a cinema piece or anything else? So what is the fine art aspect that's kind of distinctive from other artistic formats? That's one of my confusion. And my other question is about the business model. So for the works, apart from the collaboration with Google, but the works exhibited at the museum, then is it still relying on the gallery to sell the works, or how do they kind of sustain like over the time?
Yeah. So for the first part of that, there are definitely experiences that can just be 360 renders, and like it's a video art piece, and like that's the piece, which is totally fine. We're a little bit more interested in kind of pushing the interactivity element. So like a lot of these pieces are going to be spatialized and like based on like what the I don't want to say player, what the individual is doing within the space.
I like visitor.
Visitor, that's good. And so a lot of it just has to do with that. Like, and a lot of the artists that we're looking at are people that have, worked in sort of like that sort of gray area of art and tech. And so they're kind of familiar with like, exactly how to do that. And a couple of the people who haven't, like we've got one artist that we're working with who comes from music videos, and so his piece might actually just be a 360 piece, which is totally fine, and we're open to that too. I think we're just really interested in pushing the bounds of the interactivity in particular. Yeah, I think for the second piece, it depends on the artist, or second question. So like Jennifer Steinkamp, for instance, she has a gallery. She does not probably want her work sort of widely distributed in any sort of real sense. And so like she may do limited editions of a digital piece. We've worked with John Rathman, who did that with his VR piece as well, which got acquired through the gallery by a collector for quite a bit of money. So yeah.
It seems like there's an emerging market there. It's still pretty early, so.
It's still, even selling video art, which has been around for, a while, like even that's still kind of difficult. And so it kind of is similar in some ways to that, so. Yeah.
Just because I do know there's a foundation, for example, like T11, I don't know whether you're aware of it, but it's in Hong Kong, like a real estate fund, and they have a great collection focusing on video and computer games, for example, the art aspect of it. So it seems that that's very much in their range of collection.
Yeah, and I think Kaleidoscope actually sent us some of their information before in the past. Like I feel like China's actually really at the forefront of a lot of this, kind of like figuring out how to do this well. So, yeah.
A lot of this focuses, and then the industry broadly focuses on like audio-visual stuff, and obviously you use your body to interact with the world. But I'm curious, like where you see the current state and like the future states of like haptic feedback and like the experiences interacting with you in like a haptic or tactile sense.
That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. I mean, this is Leap Motion, obviously, and we've worked with that. Each of these like steps forward is really interesting and kind of like this strange. I feel like when people think of VR, they're like, okay, this is it's going to be real, and it's like, if you design it right, you never notice all the things that it can't do, right? But so much of it is like hand tracking is amazing, but if it can't push back on you, that's a very different world than other things. And haptics, what form are they taking, and what are like the mass kind of market technologies that kind of like develop first, and what do those feel like? What are their capabilities? And I think there's just incredible amounts of like interesting work to do at each of these like kind of levels, and that's kind of why we've 6 degrees of freedom tracking in VR is kind of the platform that we're on right now, at least us as a unit, because it's good enough that people don't get sick, and it also represents a lot of like amazing possibilities that are mostly untapped, and like haptics are going to just be like another addition to that, which I don't know. I'm not sure if I can say anything too specific about it because we haven't worked with it, but it's exciting.
Yeah, you should tell them about your Halloween piece. DIY haptics. Yeah, you don't have to.
Yeah. Well, it's another joke gone wrong. There was a Halloween event a couple of years ago, and we were using Leap Motion, and I found that the tracking wasn't great, unless you were like pretty clearly like this. And a lot of the examples they have of like doing dexterous things at the time, this was like 2014, did not work very well. It's like I'm going to interact with the desktop, and it's just frustrating, right? It's just worse than using a mouse in pretty much every way. So I was looking at that, and the joke was, well, you could chop your fingers off, right? Because this was a Halloween event, and I was like, what am I doing? This is terrible. So all the experiences is like it's a real fan in the space coupled with a virtual fan, and you're like maybe 6 feet away from it under a spotlight, and that's it. And you do whatever you want, but the fan doesn't have any front on it. You can walk up to it.
In real life, it does, but
yeah, in real life it does. But you can feel the air blowing on you, so that's kind of like DIY haptics. And then as you get close, if you want to stick your hands in the fan, you can. And it's very cartoony and ridiculous, but it worked surprisingly well. And she couldn't.
I've still never done it. I refuse. Like, yeah.
I don't normally like to build that kind of stuff, but it was Halloween, so yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm a journalist. I've worked with a lot of different media. I was back in the theater and immersive theater, actually, and podcasting as well as print. So I'm super interested. I think VR really asks a lot of fundamental questions about life and art and how we learn and neuroscience and how our brains work. And so I guess my question about immersive learning in general, I'm trying to formulate it. I guess it makes me think about dreams, how a lot of times we don't remember our dreams, or sometimes we do, and it's really questionable whether or not our dreams stick in our memories enough to really influence our lives. And since VR is so immersive, and it can almost be like a dream, or lived experience for that matter, a lot of our experiences in life just completely leave us, and that they don't stick in our memories. Sort of, what makes you think that VR or immersive, do you think that it sticks more than other media, or do you think it has the potential to change people more or just differently? What are your ideas about the neuroscience around that?
Yeah, I mean, look at me. Yeah, I mean, I guess it is very dreamlike to me in that sense, and I think of it in a similar way. Like we kind of just had a conversation about this a couple days ago, just like the act of remembering, and especially remembering one's dreams and just what that feels like. And I think VR is very good at that, and it's very similar. So in some ways, I think it sticks in basically the same way dreams do. I don't think it sticks more. That's just my sort of, I don't know, impression and thought on that.
Yeah, we're not neuroscientists, but it doesn't seem like it's fundamentally different, other than like the capacity to have a novel experience there. It seems like a bit higher, and so you might be more likely to remember that, or at least the first couple times. I mean, I know people have come back to us and like they saw liminal realities and having sort of a, I guess, dynamic color path, oral, like a little of everything, all the senses that we could like push on. Having that experience was new for pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
And people have come back to us and said, that was amazing. That was really cool.
I do think like it's, and this goes for anything, but like with repeated exposure, I think it would, of course. But, and then like with the PTSD examples, I think with repeated exposure, that would help. But I think just generally sort of, visiting these spaces and then like reflecting upon them, like I think it is very similar to dreams.
And it's also, I think, a little bit modulated by like what you're actually there to do, or like, what is the intention of the piece. And I think that the interactive parts of it are like, if it is a passive experience, then it's more connected to like things you might already know. But if it's something that's expressive or generative or something that you really haven't done before, then that's a different. There's all these different ways it could go. But I guess that's another form of novelty in a way, right? A novelty, like if you haven't had that experience before, and it's new.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we are out of time, unfortunately.
Oh.
Super work. I love Screensavers.
Oh, thank you. Should get it. I want to get a pic of everybody.